We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than one way to be a man. It's also the place where men can come to escape the media's magnifying glass and basically have a real conversation about what it means to be a man. And I'm not talking about manhood as a whole, I'm talking about the individual man. We're talking to each of us as men who have our own challenges, our own unique situations, our own upbringings, our own shadows, our own gold. That's the thing. The more we talk about manhood and masculinity as a whole and use absolute terms to explain the experiences for other men, the more we disconnect from the individuals involved. And so the whole purpose of this show is to break those molds, to understand that we as individuals are unique in our experiences, and just to show you, the listener, that there are multiple paths that you can choose. Just know that it's your path once you make that choice. Now, I'm your host, Brandon Clift. It's a pleasure to join you today. And today we're introducing you to quite a big name and very prominent figure in kind of the men's movement space. Now, that being said, it's he's been on a couple sides of issues pertaining to men and male power, and quite a polarizing figure. In fact, when I wanted to bring this man onto the show, there was a lot of hesitation from those within the Mankind Project, just because of maybe not perhaps so much what he stands for, but the kind of people that choose him as the man leading the charge and what we might deem to be unhealthy behaviors and characteristics. Now, with all that being said, the reason why I wanted Dr. Warren Farrell to join us on the show today is because of his unique perspectives on conversations pertaining to manhood, masculinity, as well as fatherhood. More specifically, what he deems the boy crisis, i.e. the experience of boys growing up in our country or around the world with an absent male figure in their lives, without a father or someone to guide them. And so we'll be diving into all those topics today. And before I do, let me just give you kind of a quick background on the work that Warren Farrell's been a part of and what he's achieved in the past, 5-6 decades in the space. So he's the author of many books, 2 of them being award-winning bestsellers, Why Men Are the Way They Are and The Myth of Male Power. The Financial Times has deemed him as one of the top 100 thought leaders in the world. He's currently the chair of the commission to create a White House Council for Boys and Men. And he is the only man in the US to be elected to the National Board of Women 3 times. Dr. Farrell has appeared frequently on shows like Oprah, Today, and Good Morning America. And his latest book is co-authored with John Gray. Some of you may know his work with Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He's believed to be the first male public feminist. We're talking like early days, Gloria Steinem days. John Lennon was a part of his men's group, and he's been right in the middle of the battleground between genders. And so here's my recommendation as you dive into this interview. There may be things that he says that trigger you. There may be opinions that he has that he vehemently backs with his research and his data that doesn't align with your beliefs. In fact, some of the things he says in this interview, I don't agree with. However, a big part of my mission with this show is to eliminate the echo chambers that can be created in these spaces. I want to bring people onto the show that challenge mine and challenge your beliefs. Because guess what? There may be holes, there may be flaws in the things that I believe, or perhaps in the things that you believe. And what I love as well is, although there are many things that I disagree with Dr. Warren Farrell, the things that he and I both agree on, in my judgment, are so important to the healing of the hearts of men and to creating equity in the world. And even though many don't believe him to be someone who wants to put up a good fight for equity among genders, among those of difference, I think The Boy Crisis, his book, which is a big part of our conversation today, and the messages you'll hear in this podcast will show you that he himself, whether you judge him to be active in the fight or not, believes in equity, gender equity, believes that men should be able to take on what they call pink collar jobs and be stay-at-home dads, and shouldn't be expected to pick up the check on the first date. And that women should be able to break through every glass ceiling that there is, and that we should work together to make that happen. So, with all that being said, the challenge for you now is to determine throughout this interview, what can you pull from this man's research, this man's experience, and this man's wisdom. Although you may disagree with him, just know that even those that we might be vehemently opposed to or just slightly view things differently, they have wisdom within them. There are things that they can teach us. And so I thoroughly enjoyed my interview with Warren. He clearly has spent a lot of time in the space, because you'll hear his answers to my questions can be quite lengthy. So I want you to look for yourself. What is the truth in what he's saying? And what is it that you disagree with? And let's create that as a platform to converse over and to debate and chat about the issues that are facing the world today. That is my challenge to you. That's how I encourage you to approach this interview. It's how I chose to approach this interview, although I had to bite through my tongue a couple times. Again, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Warren, and I gained a lot from spending time with him, and I hope you do as well. Anywho, that's enough from me. Enjoy this interview with Dr. Warren Farrell. Enjoy. Warren, there are a million things that I would love to chat to you about. I know we have a limited amount of time, so I hope that we can one day get to the humongous array of topics that you've covered in your research and your books and your writings. But today, let's talk about the dad void and how that impacts us. So, mate, for those that don't already know a little bit about your work and your writings, tell us, our audience, a little bit about yourself, and we'll get underway.
Well, my background started in this area in the late 1960s when I was doing my doctoral dissertation in political science, and the women's movement surfaced, and I took such an interest in it that my students at Rutgers University said, Warren, you've got to just change your dissertation, and I changed it to something focused on the women's movement, and that got me deeply involved with the women's movement. Eventually, I was elected to the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. I suppose for a number of years, I was thought of as the leading male feminist in the early 70s. And I spoke all around the world on behalf of feminist issues to women and to secure men. And that led me to realizing that when I would check to see the impact that my speeches had. And, 2 or 3 years later, I would, cross-examine people who had heard my presentations 2 or 3 years ago. And almost all of them learned nothing. They thought they learned something at the time. They might even have been part of a standing ovation, but the impact on their life was very minimal. And so I started to do experiential things to get women and men to walk a mile in each other's moccasins, where I said to the men in the audience, every woman is part of a beauty contest every day of her life, whether she's attractive or unattractive. We evaluate her and judge her as to how beautiful she is. And so I had every man participate in the beauty contest of everyday life that women go through. And then I had all the women reverse roles and take the risks of sexual rejection that men often experience, that women think nothing of oftentimes. But then when they actually have to do that by asking out the best looking guys and who won the beauty contest, they often freak out, get nervous, and become jerks, like they often think of men as being. And so this helped both sexes understand each other. And I found that did have a lot of impact. But then as I started speaking on women's issues around the world, I began to see that there was a lot of boys were doing much worse than girls were. And so eventually I started to do research for a book that became The Boy Crisis, that you can sort of see in my back of me. And that came out of seeing that in all 53 of the largest developed nations, boys were falling behind girls in almost every subject, but especially in reading and writing. And reading and writing, as you probably can guess, are the two biggest predictors of success or failure. And that boys were dropping out of high school at much higher rates than girls. And the boys who did drop out of high school, even before COVID, when the unemployment rate in the United States was 3.5, 3.6, the unemployment rate among boys who dropped out of high school in their early 20s was at more than 20% level. And obviously these boys were, who were in unemployment lines, often living in their parents' basement. These were not exactly the types of boys that women were looking for to be the future fathers. And so the boy crisis, what I came to call the boy crisis, I saw was not only hurting boys, but it was also hurting women who were looking for good potential fathers and didn't usually search for in unemployment lines or in their other families' basements for boys that were from their perspective losers. And so everybody was losing, and women who had children without being married, they were oftentimes didn't feel they had the help from men, and so they ended up being overwhelmed by taking care of both their children and jobs at the same time. So this was like a total lose-lose situation. And I've always been, people, when I was on the board of NOW, I always thought of me as a strong feminist, but I never felt myself to be a feminist per se. I've always felt that there was not a need for a women's movement that was often blaming men, or a men's movement often blaming women. I've always been a supporter of a gender liberation movement to liberate both men and women from the old rigid roles of the past, and to liberate them for more flexible roles for our future. And so I started to talk about these issues. But as I started researching for the boy crisis, I found that there were more than 50 areas in which boys were falling behind girls, and which boys were falling behind the way they used to be. You can compare boys' sperm counts to girls' sperm counts, obviously, but you can see that boys' sperm counts have reduced 60% in the last 20 or 30 years. We can see that boys' IQs have dropped 15 points in the one or two studies that have been done in Europe of that. We can see that that boys are, when they're boys and girls are at age 14, when they're age 9, they're likely to commit suicide very rarely and at equally. But between the ages of 10 and 14, boys' suicide rate becomes twice that of girls. Between the ages of 15 and 19, it becomes 4 times that of girls. And between the ages of 20 and 24, it becomes 5 times that of girls. And yet we are not seeing, asking questions like what causes that. But in fact, as I started looking at what causes that, I submitted to my publisher for the boy crisis 10 causes of the boy crisis. And in fact, all of them are somewhat causes, but I found that of those 10 causes, by far and away, the most important cause was minimal or no father involvement, or what I came to call dad deprivation. So, for example, if a boy goes from a female-only home to a female-only school, a female teacher-only school, he has no male role model that is constructive. And so boys whose testosterone is developing very quickly and powerfully, who have no constructive male role models, tend to be vulnerable to gang leaders, drug dealers, wanting them to have a sense of family, have a sense of being able to make money quickly, as in drug dealing, have a sense of family like in gangs, and they are very vulnerable to destructive senses of channeling their testosterone. However, I found that when a boy lives with a father and a mother, and the father is active in the family, and then he goes from a mother and father participatory home to a school in which there are minimal or no male teachers. He's not compacted that much because he has that strong male, constructive, caring, loving role model at home. So I saw that the dad deprivation was more important than the male teacher and the male role model. And so I began to start seeing this type of phenomenon over and over again, and then started seeing that ISIS recruits were almost all dad-deprived children, both the males and the females. That our criminals were almost all not just 93% males, but that the criminals in prison were dad-deprived males to a high degree. Then I started looking at our school shooters and seeing that there's 5 school shooters that have killed 10 or more people in the 21st century, and all 5 of them have been dad-deprived boys. And so I began to see multiple ISIS recruits, school shooters, mass shooters, prisoners, that we were paying an enormous price in society, that these boys who were dad-deprived, these were boys who hurt. And I saw that the boys who hurt us are also boys who are hurting. So those are a few of the initial.
Wow.
Sorry you asked the question.
So
I gave a very superficial answer there,
So there's about 1,200 threads I'd like to pull around that, but let's speak to the boy crisis, because that was my homework in preparation for this interview. And so the boy crisis, right? You co-authored it with John Gray. Mum and Dad always had men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Always, or it was like the little bedside Bible that they used to always have with them.
I'll tell John that.
Yeah.
And if you're younger and you don't know, John Gray is the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, to make that connection.
And so this book, The Boy Crisis, the goal is to basically integrate half a century of national discussions about the challenges faced by women and girls with an equally nuanced national discussion around those facing boys and men. And so a quick distinction, when we talk about the challenges faced by boys and men, this isn't a us versus men versus women or boys versus girls kind of discussion. It's a both and, correct?
Absolutely. Okay. Anyone that starts being anti-women is got me to deal with. Right. So, because from my perspective,
Sure.
we're all in the same family boat.
Sure.
And when only one sex wins, both sexes lose.
Sure.
And I teach couples communication courses all around the country, and am going to be developing those to put those into poor communities as well. So people who are poor don't have to worry about paying for a therapist. And so for me, what it's all about is listening to each other and freeing each other from the rigid roles of the past. But in saying that, I also want to be really honest, which is that many of my feminist friends they are people that some of them are people who feel that the world is dominated by a patriarchy, and that the patriarchy has made rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And what I hope I explained in the Boy Crisis book, that the world was not dominated by a patriarchy in the way that we normally think about it. It was dominated by the need to survive. And to survive, both sexes played rigid roles. If you were a woman who had tremendous talent to be a potential Nobel Prize winner, you were expected, nevertheless, to be a full-time mom in order to be seen as feminine and be approved of and get the acknowledgement of women, girls, people in your culture. Conversely, if you were a man, my basic personality is more of, I would call a nurturer, connector, rather than a provider, protector, and my gift, I think, in the world would have been to be a wonderful dad and a full-time dad. And while my wife went out and broke glass ceilings. But there was no special, calling. You went to a party and you said, if I were to even think about saying, my goal is to be a full-time dad while the woman makes the money and brings, I knew what would happen, which would be that the woman would say, that's really impressive, but never come back for a second drink. And so I knew that I had to be a provider protector, whether or not that was part of my personality or not.
Sure. And let's use that as the entry point into this discussion and conversation. Right. This expectation that men are supposed to be the protector provider, oftentimes, and you elucidate this in the book, comes at the expense for creating that nurturing connection with their families.
Yes.
right? You speak about especially in, we've come a lot out of the industrial age, right, where jobs, although still they're very male, more men in certain jobs that are very, very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Talking 60 years ago, it was a different picture, right? A lot more workplace death, a lot more injuries, and not only just injuries personally to the person working, but the impact of that on the family was that the family unit was primarily raised by the mother.
Absolutely.
And we know today that with research, it clearly shows that little involvement with a father or a male role model in the early development stages of children leads to not having a very well balanced cognitive ability later in life, as well as emotional intelligence. So
yes.
And so from that end, what have you noticed around? I've got to think of how I want to ask this question. Let me ask you the trajectory now, 2021. Are you noticing a positive swing towards men being encouraged to be more involved in the family unit versus the traditional role of being out in the workplace? Or do you feel like we're kind of still a bit stuck to these old ideas that men are the providers, protectors, women are the nurturers and the connectors?
We're not stuck to it in theory as much as we used to be, but in practice, while it's gotten more flexible than it used to be, it certainly is nowhere near where the average woman who is contemplating, and the big issue is not between women and men. The big issue is between dads and moms. Once women and men decide to have children, that's when roles tend to develop to a much greater degree. So, for example, right now, when men and women have children and they're married or living together, 40% of the women work full time, but full time fewer hours than before they had children. So full time is defined as 35 hours a week or more by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So many more women are more likely when they have children to work like 36, 37 hours a week. That's 40% of them work full time, but usually around that 36, 37 hours a week. Women, another 40% of women do not work at all outside the home. They just put all their work energies into the home, into the children and raising a family. So you have 40% work full time, 40% work at home full time, and 20% in between working part time, usually about 20 hours a week. Whereas the father, a very different type of thing happens. Men, when we have children and we become dads, we start to say to ourselves, okay, before I was able to make some, gigs as a musician, and that was great, but it didn't produce a lot of money, but it didn't make that much difference. But now I can't afford to become a musician now that I'm a father, because I can't have dependable, secure income over a period of my children's lives. And so I have to quit becoming a musician and sell product X to, and do things that I really don't care about doing, because in the process of not of doing that, I can make more money. So men, and so a lot of things come out of this. Dads tend to give up things that they love to do, like being an elementary school teacher, being an actor or writer, sort of somebody who is an artist, and they give that up to do something that they like less, that pays more, because now they have to be responsible for their children and their wife, and they have to move into a community that has good schools and make sure that they have margin for error. So if their children have some type of ADHD or are on the autism spectrum, or have major problems with their teeth, they have the extra money to be able to pay for that. And so dads tend to give up doing what they want to do what they feel they need to do to earn more money. And so what we made, that is a huge mistake in the feminist movement, and I say we because remember my background was being on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women and speaking around the world on feminist issues. What we did is we said, okay, men earn more than women. So men are sort of the oppressors and women are the oppressed. And we men keep women earning less so that we can control and dominate them. Quite the opposite. And then we've been calling that male privilege and male power, but in fact, it's the exact opposite of power. Power is to control your own life, to be able to control your own life in such a way as to be happy. And so what men did is gave up their personal fulfillment and happiness so that they could earn more money, so that their children would have opportunities that they never had before. And so their wives could have a type of an emotional security, to have the choice of being with the children full time, being with the children part time, or being with in the workplace. And what the big mistake we made as feminists was saying that this was about male privilege and male power, when in fact it was not at all about male privilege. It was about male sacrifice, men not having the feeling that they had the right to be able to earn less and do things that were fulfilling, because fulfilling jobs tend to earn less. Hence, we call them starving artists. Another 12 things for you to take off on, eh?
Yeah. So I do want to be conscious that I see how this all intersects, and these threads, right? They pique my brain to want to go in all these different directions. So I really do hope this isn't the only time we talk. But it seems so. Just as well, these conversations that we're having, do the same things apply to relationships of same sex? Like non-traditional households?
Yes, the same-sex relationships are more complex, but for the most part, like a good percentage of the people that attend the couples communication work that I do are same-sex couples. And what I find is that number one, is the communication issues with same-sex couples are identical to the communication issues with heterosexual couples. That is, no one feels heard, HEARD, by anyone. Meaning that when they get into a long-term relationship, issues come up, and each person tries to express what their upsetness is with their partner, and then the partner becomes defensive because biologically, the Achilles heel of all human beings is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And so then the person who's bringing up a concern realizes that the last time they brought up a concern, it escalated, and the end result was that they felt even more angry toward each other, and then there was a barrier between them. So they had to they increased the degree to which their concern had to be really crucial before they brought it up, because they didn't want to get into an angry place again. And before you know it, they were on the verge of divorce, or vulnerable to somebody they met on a plane or somewhere that seemed to understand them for 15 minutes and want to be sexual with them, because they finally felt there was something that they could, somebody that seemed to understand them, which with no test of that in real life. And so these are some of the types of things that come up.
Time out. Okay, so
am I describing your and your girlfriend's relationship?
No, this isn't touching.
This is wonderful.
No, not close to home in our relationship, fortunately.
Oh, good. I'm very glad to hear that.
I want to talk to we talk about these men that don't feel like they can pursue certain jobs or paths in life because they're not going to pay well, right? You're not expected to go to school, get the degree, get the good job, provide for the family, right? If that's the old traditional model, let's just say.
Yeah.
And worth acknowledging, I'm sure, these expectations, right? We talk about the man box often, right? These expectations for men to not show weakness, and you throw all that in there as well. I'm sure there's influence. What do you think we can do as men to help break the stigmas and association linked to, I think it's been phrased pink collar jobs, right? What can we do to break the stigmas and associations to this kind of work, to give boys and men more options?
Yes, two things. First of all, I realize I didn't answer the end of your last question about gay couples, so let me just finish that part off, and then I'll come back to this part. So with gay couples, many gay men and women, many gay men marry. One man will be more of a protector, provider, and the other more of a nurturer, connector. Same with gay women. Oftentimes, so that even within gay couples, there's oftentimes an attraction to someone that sort of complements you. And so when if a gay couple adopts children, one will be more likely they both know ahead of time very frequently which one will take off and work full time and which one will be with the children to a greater degree. And they tend to play, ironically, male-female roles even within their same-sex relationships. So that's that's just a completion of your last question on that issue. Repeat your new question again too, just so I have that fresh in my mind.
Yeah. So and I'll before I repeat the question, I'll tell you why I'm asking it. Is you mentioned in the book about you did a process. You were in a workshop and you were helping a man process I think a tough relationship he has with his father, and it's around he felt like his father just had to give up a lot of what he wanted to do in life to be a father, and was actually harboring that energy towards his family and his son. Right. So would you mind reminding us of that example, that anecdote? And then my question is, what can we do to break the stigmas and associations linked to, let's call them pink collar jobs, so that we can give boys and men more options in life?
Yes, very good. Yeah, I'll actually even take the father issue. I'll take it a step further and be personal about it. And I remember when I moved to California, and my father lived in New Jersey, and he and mom, flew out to spend some time with me. And after 3 days of spending time with me, he didn't ask me a single question about myself. He just talked about himself. And I felt after 3 days, I should ask him, what was going on here. And so he hesitated and actually paused. And he said, eventually, well, I want to keep our relationship good. And I said, but Dad, a good relationship is not about a one-sided thing. It's an interchange. Yeah, I know that. But I still want to keep our relationship good. And I said, share with me what's going on about that. And he said, you really probably won't want to hear it. And I said, that's fine. I'd rather have our relationship be a relationship than this stone wall of silence. And he says, and this is when I was speaking around, doing TV shows all the time, and was communicating with a lot more people than I am now. And he said, well, I guess I feel the work you're doing is ruining the lives of millions of people. And after I joked about I wasn't affecting millions of people, I said, why do you feel that way? And he said, because you're teaching people psychology. And psychology teaches people to think about what they want to do, what their goals are, what their wishes are, what their desires are. It doesn't teach people how to do what they need to do. And being a man is about learning what you need to do. And it's, I needed to earn money. I could have been like an artist or a writer like you, and maybe a teacher. Maybe I could and maybe I couldn't have. But I knew that when I had you and Gail, your sister, and then your brother, that I had to earn money and give up doing what I needed to do. So you have a gift in math, but you don't use it because I'm an accountant, and you see how boring that is. And so you feel you can do what you want to do. And that's probably good for you. You seem to be able to make it doing that. But it's not good for all the people you teach to focus on their rights and their wishes and their desires. And he said, the background on that was that when I started to begin to write, my father was very much opposed to my writing. And because he said that, Warren, and it wasn't because he was opposed to my writing per se, but he just said, do you realize, Warren, that only about 1 out of 100 writers ever even finish the book that they start. And then only about 1% of them ever get published. And among the ones that get published, they only earn about $5,000 on a given book. So if you can't find a publisher, you'll never find a wife. And you'll never, because no wife is going to, want to marry an unpublished author. And so you're going to really limit your life. And so when you're teaching all these people how to sort of desire and think about what they want and just about communication, as opposed to just focusing on their obligations and their responsibilities, you're teaching selfishness. You're teaching people just to focus on me, me, me. And that's what your generation has become. And that's what you're teaching people to do. And you're one of the leaders of this type of destructiveness. And so, I sat and I listened, and it was really powerful because I saw what he meant. And, in his generation, he died when he was 99, and he lived when he was 35. He had lived through 2 world wars and a depression. He was born in 1910. And from his perspective, you did what you needed to do. And here we in the feminist movement were blaming men for earning more money and saying that they had male privilege and male power, as opposed to sort of, and my dad, his perspective on what he said to me, was just like, it wasn't in the universe among us men. We were not thinking that, oh yes, we want to move to a different level of greater and flexible roles. And the fact that women are now sharing some of the economic responsibilities for earning money allows us some freedoms that we've never had before. So let's all rejoice in this and evolve toward more flexible roles. From my father's perspective, you didn't have the luxury of flexible roles. And from a feminist perspective, the fact that you as a man ended up making these sacrifices, it was never seen as sacrifices among us feminists. It was seen as male privilege and male power and male dominance. And that was that was what we were missing. And so the boy crisis really evolved from not understanding some of this of what was happening, which is in the old days, boys had a sense of purpose, and their sense of purpose was to be, each generation had its war. And in that generation, boys were called forth to be disposable, not privileged, but disposable in that war. The purpose of masculinity was to be a provider, protector. To protect, you needed to be willing to die, to kill and be killed in that generation's war. And when you came back from the war, you needed to be a full-time provider. And you didn't have it as an option. It was an expectation, and it was a pressure on you. And so that's what we didn't understand. And so what is the way out of this? The reason I wrote a book called The Myth of Male Power was to say to men, and the boy crisis is to say to men, this is not freeing you to discover who you wish to be. One of the great gifts of the women's movement is that women have been free to say, if I want to be a full-time mom, I can be a full-time mom. If I want to break a glass ceiling, I should have the right to break a glass ceiling. Yeah. I should, and men should support me on that, whether they're in the workplace, the home, or wherever. And if I want to do some combination of both, or if I want to do one for 20 years and another for 20 years, I should have all of those rights, opportunities, expectations, and support systems. And because we have been put into this mental position of thinking that we had the power by not being able to think about what we wanted to do, we've lost. We have to speak up and discover that power is different from what we've been told it is. And the people who get this best in the world are millennials in Japan who have a game called karoshi. Karoshi in Japanese is death from overwork or death at the desk. And the game karoshi in Japan is everybody has a figure called karoshi, and they try to get that figure up the ladder to the very top faster than any other karoshi character that's playing the game. And the person who gets to the top of that corporate ladder or that business ladder, that political ladder first, wins the game. And his reward or her reward is to commit suicide. That is not in real life, but in the game. And the message of Kuroshi as a game is when you are spending your life climbing some ladder that you call success, what you've ended up doing is killing yourself as a human being. You've just become a human doing. And masculinity has historically been defined not by the ability of a boy to become a human being, but rather a human doing, and therefore killing himself.
If you're enjoying the Mankind podcast, how about taking another step? This one takes some courage, and you've got it. Check out the Men's Work Introduction. It's 3 sessions over 3 weeks. New sessions start every month, and we even have a cohort tailored to LGBTQ men, which you can learn more about at bit.ly/menswork2.
What do we need to do about that? Communicate that message. That message is to men in the future what the women's movement was to women. But that message, because we've solidified men becoming human doings as men having power, we're still fooling ourselves into not allowing ourselves to ask the question of, who do I want to be? The question my dad was afraid to ask, and the question my dad was afraid to have me have other people ask.
Not what do you want to do? What do you want to become? Who do you want to be?
Yes, who do you want to be? What type of human being do you want to be? And that in the past, boys and men did not have the privilege to even ask that question.
Yeah. So it's a new time. It's a new era. We have these old models that are still at play here. There's a part of the book that I really hit home for me, where a grandfather was speaking to his grandson and whispering into his ear that, I love spending time with you more than anything.
Yes.
And then when that grandson goes to become a professional in his career, when he's offered the promotion that involves travel, increased pay, but more commitments outside of work hours, traveling and such, time away from the family, that this grandson turns down those promotions because he knows it would be at the cost of the same thing that his grandfather impressed on him at a young age, that spending time with you is my favorite thing more than anything.
Yes.
And so, we've been very fortunate to have guests on the show like Tony Porter, Niobe Way, people that have been so deeply involved in work around this, what Niobe calls the connection crisis, right? We train boys out of these sensitivities from a young age to subscribe to a role as a man, to be unfeeling, right? To be the doers of the world. But what you're suggesting is to, number one, give them the flexibility to choose where they land there, but to really give credence and time to what it is that they want to do.
Yes, absolutely.
So what is your vision for the future if boys and men and people of all genders have the ability to pursue what it is that they want to do and be able to move outside of this linear path that's been set up for us?
Yes. So many things have to happen simultaneously, or close to simultaneously. One, and probably the most important one, is we really need to work with girls on being comfortable and having social permission to marry males who are the artists, the writers, the thinkers, the feelers, the doers, or who are the full-time dads. And have not just that be something that a man does when he doesn't have a job and the woman does. And so therefore he by default becomes the full-time dad because he's half dad and half loser. And I said loser there. And the woman sort of feels like somebody she meets at work is really more attractive because he's sort of more the winner type. And so we have to be saying to women, if you want to break glass ceilings and you want to go places, make a contribution in the world outside of the home, then consider marrying and allowing yourself to find attractive a guy who is a caring, loving, emotionally intelligent guy who would be a great dad. But girls and women are not trained to look for that even today. they're not given so much condemnation for finding that today as they used to be. But still, when girls and young women talk with each other about a guy who's eligible, it's usually not a guy who wants to be a father full time. It's usually a guy who is, he just got into medical school. He's going to be a great lawyer. His new company, just his startup, is really doing well. These are the types of things. He's really a tech genius. He's got a great job with Google or Amazon. These are the types of things. These are still the way that girls and women talk with each other about about guys that are attractive if they are thinking about getting married and having children. When girls and women are just thinking about dating some guy, it's who's tall and who's good looking. But when it comes to the marriage and having children, there's a different type of settlement. And so and guys will be, to a large degree, what women want them to be. Guys, one of the reasons we become successful, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons we become successful is because we know that if we're successful, then we have a chance of attracting a whole different class and group of women. And women who are younger and, quote, more beautiful, the group that we're addicted to, that we have to question our attraction to. But this is part of our biology, is women being attracted to security blankets that could protect them and their children. And in all the animal kingdoms, the entire animal kingdom, from insects to human beings, about 85% of reproduction occurs between the female and the alpha male. And so the alpha male is like with buck elks, for example. The alpha male is the one that has the largest rack. And in order to get that rack, no one understands that exhausts, to get that rack, it exhausts 30% of the minerals, the calcium, and the nutrients in the body of that buck elk. And so if he doesn't rub immediately after reproduction, if he doesn't rub his antlers off, he is likely to die of malnutrition if the winter sets in before he has a chance to replenish all his nutrients. The point there being that males, in order to become the alpha male, no one has understood that men's male weakness is often their facade of strength. That female was attracted to the male who had the biggest rack, but that was a facade of strength and useful to kill off any people that were trying to have sex with her that were not worthy of her being alpha males. But in order to play that role, just like a man who enters war, he often has to risk his life in the process of doing so. So we haven't understood that men's weakness is our facade of strength. And that is the core message one of the core messages that need to get out to the males as well as the females, that if we want to have men who are sensitive, caring, emotionally intelligent human beings who still take risks, who still have some of the positive dimensions of masculinity as well, then we have to start rewarding men who are the way we want them to be and singing their praises, as opposed to going to football games with the family and only cheering and having the cheerleaders cheer for 1st and 10, do it again, meaning 1st and 10, risk a concussion again. And the father saying, that's my son there. He's the one that just caught that pass. Oh, he just got hurt. Oh my goodness, your son was hurt. Oh, he has to go to the hospital. Oh, he has a concussion. Oh, but sooner or later he'll come back there and play again. That's this. We still have the football player is still the hero, and gets the cheerleaders in almost all the high schools in America.
Shout out to Ashanti Branch.
Yes.
You have a Ford Club. I noticed you mentioned him in your resources on your website. He says, what if we make nurturing, caring, connection alpha traits in men? What if we can make those the alpha traits? Those the things that really change the current operating model. And really what it sounds like you're talking about, Warren, is just really kind of tearing down the old tracks for what it means to be a successful male, a successful female. Here in South Dakota, be a good man. So it really, and so I can imagine that process. It can't be linear. It's only going to be messy because we are going against the grain, right?
Absolutely. And in doing that, first of all, I 100% agree. And Shanti and I have talked about this many times. This is exactly what we need to be training males to do. And at the same time, we need to be training them to do this as an option,
right?
Not as now the only good males are the emotionally intelligent, highly connected males. That there is a very important role for traditional people in the culture. We need our firefighters. We need our warriors. Our fighters in wars. That's going to be with us, I'm afraid, for a long time. We need our police officers to take risks. The police officers and the warriors should be able to be female or male, but it is going to be true for a long period of time that the great majority of firefighters, police officers, and people attracted to and willing to play a role in dangerous jobs are going to be males. That 93% of the people who die at work, a direct workplace injuries, are males, but a much higher percentage are males who die from remnant workplace injuries like black lung disease, where 10 years later, 20 years later, you die of the what you consumed as a firefighter. And so these are all sacrifices that males made and make today in much higher numbers than men. And so we have to begin to say that while we appreciate this, that women, if women really want to speak up and say we want to be an equal part of the society, it is not just pick and choose liberation, choose the jobs that are the fancy jobs, the ones that are the CEO types, but also where are the female firefighters, where are the equal numbers of females in combat, and even when females are in combat, we know only about 1% of females, less than 1% actually, of women who die in combat situations are females, even though about 12% of the military is female. So you get a sense of this still way disproportionate willingness to take risks and die to save others that men still do. So we will need that, but we need to not make that the definition of masculinity, but an option for masculinity, just like we make successful women or full-time homemaking women options for femininity.
I like what you're saying about make it an option. Daniel, a mutual friend of ours, Daniel Ellenberg, he's actually the link between us. He and I had a conversation previously about the distinction between willingness and wantingness, right? First having the conversation of am I wanting to change, but am I willing to do the work to make that change? But also to have the grace for the people out there that perhaps are in more insular communities. Perhaps there isn't a lot of diversity. Perhaps, the environment, like the nurture and the nature of how they've been raised, doesn't grant them a very worldly view, let's just say, of what's happening right now with the change socially and politically. And I've had a real luxury here in Tennessee of being able to communicate with men, women, non-binary people, but especially the men that have been raised, let's just say, in a more traditional model of manhood and masculinity. And as I've spent time with these men and connected with them and watched them as fathers, I've watched just their beautiful hearts turn up, that they want so much good to come for the betterment. And what I judge to be all people, they don't necessarily have the language, they don't necessarily have the role models, and they don't necessarily have the path to communicate that. So for example, I have a friend who said, I was talking, I'm not sure how the conversation ended up going towards sexual preference or sexual orientation, sorry, not preference, orientation. And he goes, yeah, I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me, but whatever other people want to do, it's up to them. The more I've had conversations with him around that, the more I've noticed his willingness and his openness to change his ideas around that. But from the outset, I could have said, well, you're a narrow-minded person.
Yes.
And just painted him with that. let's throw in, you're a narrow-minded white male. Let's paint him with that. And so from having this conversation with you, from reading the book, it sounds like, and this is from a layman like myself who's just figuring this stuff out as well. I don't always have the language to communicate these topics. It sounds like a lot of what people from opposing sides of different arguments, a lot of us want generally the same thing, right? To be able to unite and move forward as humankind and work this stuff out, this messy stuff out together, which leads me to my question. What is the issue you believe that men, women, non-binary people need to unite around for your vision of a better world for men and boys, or for all people?
Yes. First of all, that men are not the enemy, that men are not patriarchs whose desire is to be dominant. That is, as soon as the women's, men are the people who died for you so you would live. We were the ones who went to war, so that and were willing to die so you could live, so your brothers and sisters could live, so your parents could live, so that you could have a good life. We were the ones who, when we got married and had children, ones who quit the jobs that we loved to do, doing things that we felt we needed to do to make the family better. And so I remember speaking to a cab driver, just before Uber became sort of super popular, and he had spent his life driving a cab in the Santa Cruz area. And I talked to him about that, and he said, I spend 70 hours a week driving a cab. I hated driving a cab. I would not have minded driving 10 hours a week, but 70 hours a week was absolutely exhausting and boring. And he said, but I did it because I wanted my children to be the first in my family to go to college. And so I was so proud and happy when my daughter looked like she was getting very good grades, and she, in fact, got into UC Santa Cruz, University of California, Santa Cruz. And so I felt like all the work that I did and the sacrifice I made was sort of worth it. But then she came back after the first holiday season, and she started explaining to me, that I had male privilege, and I had white male privilege, although he was more Hispanic white, and that he was he was an oppressor, and that that he should sort of realize that. And it was like I felt my entire life I had just wasted, becoming to make these types of sacrifices. I did not mind making them, so my daughter would have a life that was better than my life. But it hurt me so deeply to make these sacrifices, and then be told this was about male privilege and male power. I just felt like it really undermined everything and just misunderstood everything that I was saying. And when I tried to tell her something differently, it was she couldn't hear a word I was saying. And so he said to me, I was tempted to commit suicide at one point. He said, I'm not in that place now, but I've lost my willingness to drive a cab so many hours a week because I no longer have a purpose in doing that. But I feel so undervalued and so underappreciated. And so I think that is part of what's been happening today. That is, and men who speak up about these things are men who are just put down as like you don't understand. You're part of you're part of that patriarchal group. You're the dominant group, and so on. And there's no sense of the powerlessness that men experience, and the desire to protect others and to be there for others and to make these sacrifices.
So to reiterate this, it sounds like the more we focus on an us and them approach, is kind of like saying, well, there's a debt that you have to pay as a man, or there's a debt that you have to pay. Because isn't it the same thing to say like, well, men sacrifice their lives to provide for you. So, it's not that a debt that women have to pay because of that sacrifice. It's just an acknowledgement to say, hey, and vice versa, right? It's an acknowledgement that, hey, if we can at least just rise the tides together for the betterment of all people, let's get out of this us and them conversation and more towards both and to validate the experiences of the individuals, right? To validate the experience of this cab driver and his reality and what's going on for him, so that he doesn't have to slap on that shame that comes from that.
Exactly.
Same for the
we acknowledge women for being willing to risk their lives in childbirth, especially historically, and not necessarily so much recently, but certainly in many countries still that way. And then to sacrifice, make sacrifices of their careers. And we also need to acknowledge men for historically having made sacrifices in their careers, like I was mentioning before about giving up the things they love to do for the things that earn more money. And so these are two of the acknowledgements we need to do. But we also have some really hard work to do. So for example, which is to give both sexes in relationships freedom to come and discover who they want to be. There still is, especially when children are anticipated or born, there's still a very strong propensity to move to gender stereotype roles. And we can all give our sisters and brothers much more permission to have roles that are not conforming to the gender stereotype roles. That's one thing we can do. Second thing is we can recognize that this is not a world of oppressors versus oppressed. And we see this every day happening, meaning that the White House Gender Policy Council was just created in the last few weeks signed into executive order by President Biden. So here's a White House Gender Policy Council. The mission statement is to focus on two things. Number one is what the challenges are for women and girls. And you might think the second thing is what the challenges are for boys and men. But the second thing is not that. It is only on a gender level to focus on the challenges women and girls have, with zero focus on challenges that boys, men, and fathers have, which also undermines the second purpose of the Gender Policy Council, and that is to have racial justice. But if you have racial justice for just Black females, you're completely eliminating the single biggest problem in the Black and African American community, which is the challenges that Black males have. Black males are, for each one Black female who's killed by a police officer, 26 Black males are killed by a police officer. When you're driving while Black is driving while Black male. The Blacks who are in prison are about 90% males. And so the Blacks who are homeless on the street are almost all males. And so to ignore males is to also be racist, because if you really want to solve the problems of Black Lives Matter, then what we should be doing in a Gender Policy Council is having father warrior programs, because the Black community is having the challenges it has to a large degree because of the absence of dads at the 70% level in the Black community. That is 70% of children in the Black community who are being brought up with in dad-deprived homes. And we have known for a long period of time, since 1965 in the Moynihan Report, that the challenges in the inner cities are not because of Blacks, but they're because of the percentage. It's only in those Black families where there is a lack of father involvement. When the Moynihan Report was done in 1965, the percentage of Black families that had a dad-deprived situation for boys was 25%. The percentage of today is 70%. And the percentage of white families, Caucasian families that are dad deprived is now 32% higher than it used to be for the Black community. So we can see, and this is where the boy crisis resides. The boy crisis resides where dads do not reside. And so getting father involvement is the single biggest solution to solving racial injustice and solving and to making gender an issue where both men and women focus on the challenges that both sexes have. And a gender policy council that was at all constructive would be one that looks at the more than 50 developmental areas and problems that boys are having that I describe in the boy crisis, and particularly the ones that dad-deprived boys and girls are having. Dad-deprived girls have almost all those 50 developmental problems that dad-deprived boys have. They just don't have them as intensely as dad-deprived boys have, and they have them in sometimes different areas than dad-deprived boys have. So we have hard work to do, and so I would love to say that that this is all over by just saying everybody listen to everybody, and that would be exactly what should happen. But what we have to listen to is I've been trying to work with the White House Gender Policy Council to incorporate boys and men to completely no avail. I've been trying to work with Senator Hickenlooper to make that happen, and trying to work with other people to make that happen. And while there's been no movement whatsoever upon incorporating boys, fathers, and men in those concerns that would be exactly what you're saying, which would be to uplift the dialogue and recognize that when we work on feminist female problems, we are helping men, and when we're working on male problems, we are helping women, because we're all in the same family boat.
Warren, what's your call to action for all of the fathers out there and the future fathers to be?
Right now, the call to action is I chair a coalition to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, which would operationally be to try to incorporate into the Gender Policy Council concerns for boys and men. So that would be one call to action. Another call to action on just the family level is I'd say the two most important parts of the boy crisis that would be very helpful to anyone who cares about your sisters and brothers and your father and mother is, number one, the family dinner nights, and how to create a family dinner night that does not become a family dinner nightmare. What's the listening process that one needs to be involved? How to construct it so that that you have a family dinner night where there's no electronics involved? How do you make it interesting? How do you make it so that your son and daughter, who are teenagers, are actually willing to speak up? What are the barriers that prevent our teenage sons and daughters from speaking up? How do we do family dinner night in such a way that they're excited to speak up, that they speak up to mom and dad at the table in such a way that they do to their boyfriends, their male companions, or especially females to female companions? And so to study those guidelines of the family dinner night, which is one of the appendixes in the boy crisis. The other biggest misunderstandings, I think, between fathers and mothers is not understanding the 7-8 major differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. So dad-style parenting is, for example, much more likely to involve roughhousing, much more likely to involve teasing, much more likely to encourage sons and daughters to take risks, maybe of going camping, and the son and daughter say, can I walk to the lake nearby? And mom goes, no, that's too far away. You can only walk there with either me or dad, accompanying you. And dad saying, maybe the dad accompanies them, but lets them go, far in the distance and maybe get lost for a while, because dad wants to teach the child what to do to prevent him or herself getting lost, and what to do when you get lost, how to find yourself back. But mom wants to protect the child from getting lost to begin with. And so the value of, and the value of roughhousing. How does roughhousing, I've never heard a father yet say, I love to roughhouse with the children because, after all, roughhousing helps children develop empathy. Like, what? What could be more counterintuitive than saying roughhousing helps children develop empathy? but we know it does, in at least the way most fathers do roughhousing. And so dads have to read about what their style of parenting is that leads to things like roughhousing that seem so counterintuitive from producing empathy, to be able to explain to mom exactly why the roughhousing in the style that dad does, which I'd have to explain in more depth, leads to empathy and leads to the child being able to make distinctions between being assertive and aggressive. But dads don't read these things in parenting magazines because they don't exist in parenting magazines, which is why I had to write about them in the Boy Crisis book. And then, and if dads did have that experience and knew about it, well, they can't expect moms to hear it unless they say it. So moms can't hear what dads don't say. And so it's not mom's fault that they don't understand this. Dads don't speak about it. It's not dad's fault that they don't understand it. It's not out there in the culture, understanding what the value of things like roughhousing are, the value of things like teasing are. Teasing feels like insensitive to their sons, or wit-covered put-downs feel like the father's being insensitive to the son. There's a purpose to these things that have evolved, and all of them can go too far. Roughhousing can be problematic, and teasing can be problematic, and letting kids take risks can be problematic. And that's exactly why the children who do the best are children that have what I call checks and balance parenting, where there's an appropriate tension between the mom style of parenting and the dad's style of parenting. The child says, "Can I go out and climb in the tree in the backyard?" And mom says, "Well, maybe in a few years, sweetie, but right now, that tree is too dangerous for you." And dad goes, "Oh yeah, go ahead and climb the tree, but be careful." And mom finds out that dad has said yes, and is furious at dad, and they get into a big argument, as opposed to negotiating this. What is there about the climbing the tree that's a problem? Well, the child could fall out of that tree and get a concussion or die. And so, all right, how can we prevent that? Dad, you need to be out under the tree while the child climbs a tree, and we have an agreement that the child doesn't go above this level, and you would make sure that is enforced, so the child has a chance to take some risks, but not risk his life or her life. And so those are the types of negotiations where the child gets the best of both worlds, like climbing the tree. And why is that good to climb the tree at all? Because your IQ develops, increases when you do things like climb trees. Your assessments of risks increase. Which branch is safe? Which branch is not safe? How do I test it? All the synapses begin to fire in a way that's different, like synapses always do when we enter into areas of discomfort for ourselves. And so these are the things that fathers and mothers need to communicate about. So if you're choosing two parts of the Boy Crisis book to focus on right at the outset, focus on the parts about why, what do dads contribute? Why is it that children who are 9.5 years of age, who have father involvement, have telomeres that are 14% longer? That is, telomeres are the part of the cells in your body that contain the genetic resistances to cancer and to other problems that one might have residing in one's genes. And the longer your telomeres are, especially at the age of about 9.5, the longer you are predictably likely to live. Well, when there's father involvement in the family, even when socioeconomic variables are controlled for, the children are likely to have 14% longer telomeres. That is a 14% predictable, longer life expectancy predictable. But the telomeres of the boys are yet again 40% longer than the telomeres. Boys' telomeres are 40% shorter than the girls are when they don't have father involvement. So dad deprivation means on average that children lose length of telomeres by about 14%, but boys 40% more than that 14%. So that gives you a sense of it's almost a metaphor, but it's literally true as to the greater vulnerability of boys not having a male role model, but at the same time, how it impacts negatively also our daughters, even at the age of 9.5.
Warren, let me ask you, how can people find out more about the book, get their hands on it, and start integrating into their families?
Fortunately, Amazon does have a sale on the paperback version and the Audible version. I have to say that I get as many positive comments about the Audible version. I read that in my own voice, and John Gray, who wrote the 5 chapters on ADHD issues, reads that in his own voice, and people seem to like that a lot. And that's also on sale on Amazon. However, if you have a few more dollars and you can afford to support your local bookstore, getting The Boy Crisis at a local bookstore is a wonderful thing to do.
Fantastic. Well, for those that are watching live, we've just posted it in the comments, and those listening on the podcast, it will be in the show notes so you can get your hands on it. Warren, mate, thank you for the time. I really appreciate you sharing your just your years of experience and your insights from not just this project, but all the way up from till you got into the arena with all of it. So, mate, thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate that. Any final comments, thoughts you'd like to share with the audience before we take off?
Just to really appreciate the fact that you're listening to a man, not me, but the wonderful interviewer here who just asks really great questions, does his homework, reads the book, listens carefully to longer in-depth answers, and is so, I think, facilitative. And so it's been just a total pleasure working with you, Brandon.
Oh, mate, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much for saying that. And you know what? I'm going to own that. I'm going to let that sink in, and I'm going to own that.
Yes.
So thank you, Warren. Well, mate, I'm going to get you to hang around for a hot second. But for those that have joined us live, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your awareness and your giveaway to be here with us today for another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. We'll see you very soon. Actually, we'll see you on Thursday with our live interview with Terry Real. We look forward to that one. Lots of love. Goodbye. So there you have it. Another fun interview with a pretty impressive bloke. And here's something that I want those to know. After doing the live interview, I had a couple reach out to me going, don't you know what people assign Warren's message to be? And I said, well, yes, I'm aware of that. And I understand that there are those that put him in a binary, in their binary thinking, they put him on a side. And be that as it may, and understanding that binaries are merely lenses in which our brains can try and understand something and our place in something. I also want to acknowledge that there are phenomenal things in The Boy Crisis and phenomenal information that really lands for me, and that he has access to research data, experience, wisdom that all of us can learn from. And so to that person that wants to put me in that same side of their binary thought process, cool. Like, if that's what helps you understand the world, what I will argue with you about, though, is that binary thinking is not helpful. It is hurtful. It creates an us and them mentality. And so, although I don't agree with everything Warren says, there is a lot that I can learn from, grasp, and grow with. And guess what? The spaces in between of what we agree and don't agree on, that's where the discovery happens. That's where the innovation, that's where the growth occurs. However, I find those that have the most impact in this world are the ones that don't choose to look at the binary approach, because those that live within a binary will only connect with those who agree with what they think. And those that bring people together, those from opposite viewpoints, beliefs, backgrounds, the ones that choose to create an environment in which those conversations happen are the ones, in my judgment, that have the most impact. So I apologize to anyone out there if I no longer fit in the mold of what is your binary thought process, because I choose not to. You won't know my political beliefs or opinions because I'm not a Democrat, nor am I a Republican. I don't identify with any of those things. I have my process, my journey, my thought process, my feelings that are my own. And each person listening to their podcast is their own unique human being. So the encouragement here is to unsubscribe whatever binaries you have set up in your life to view the world. As challenging as that may be, and it's easier said than done, that is my offer. That is the opportunity in which that I offer to you. Trust me, it's a much more enjoyable way to live. And that's just me. You do you. I'm going to do me. If you want to find out more about Dr. Warren Farrell, be sure to head to the links in the show notes. We'll link to his TED Talk. We'll link to his interviews with Jordan Peterson, as well as his website. And you can find a link to the Boy Crisis as well. Guys, I love this work. I'm so grateful to be in this space and to get the time to connect with these incredible human beings that are in the space of manhood, masculinity, boy psychology, man psychology, just all of it. I feel like such a blessed student to get to have these conversations, and I'm so grateful to have you with me on this journey. We have some exciting interviews coming out. We are about to near our 50th episode, and we're going to celebrate that with, mate, someone that I believe, in my judgment, is one of the most, he's been put on this earth in my judgment to heal. And the impact he's having with his work is phenomenal. So stay tuned for episode 50. I'm not going to give it away. I'm going to tease it for you. And we hope to see you then. Thank you again for your continued support. Thank you for listening. And the fee for this episode is to share it with someone that you believe might get some benefit. And if you believe there's some goldenness for you, guess what? There's probably golden fruit for those around you. Lots of love, and we'll see you next week. This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodgson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.